The evening was quiet, and the wind carried the chill of hunger and hopelessness through the narrow streets of the city. Among the shadows walked a young girl, her thin hands clutching the edge of her worn shawl. Her stomach growled, but she ignored it. She had been walking since morning, searching for a place, any place that might offer her a piece of bread. Her clothes were faded, her shoes torn, and her eyes reflected the pain of someone who had seen too much hardship too early in life. As she reached the end of the long road, she stopped in front of a tall iron gate. Beyond it stood a huge mansion glowing with warm lights. It looked like another world, one filled with comfort, laughter, and food. The smell of freshly baked bread and roasted meat drifted through the air, making her even weaker. For a long moment she just stood there, afraid to knock. She had been turned away so many times before, shouted at and treated like she didn't belong. But tonight her hunger was stronger than her fear. Slowly she raised her hand and knocked on the big wooden door. The sound echoed in the still air. Her heart pounded fast. She waited, unsure if anyone would answer. Seconds passed, and then she heard footsteps from inside. The door creaked open slightly, revealing a well-dressed but tired-looking servant. He frowned when he saw her, a small, shivering girl with dirt on her face and tears in her eyes. "Please," she whispered softly, her voice trembling. "Can I have some food?" "Just a little bread. I haven't eaten since yesterday." The servant looked at her pitifully but hesitated. "You shouldn't be here," he said quietly. "Go somewhere else. This isn't a place for beggars." The girl lowered her eyes. Her lips quivered and she clutched her shawl tighter. "I've tried everywhere," she said in a broken voice. "Please, I'm so hungry." Just then, a deep voice came from behind the servant. "What's going on here?" It was the owner of the mansion, a man known across the city for his wealth and success. He was tall, dressed in an expensive suit, and carried the calm confidence of someone who had everything in life. But behind his serious expression was a tired heart, one that hid a painful story of loss. When he stepped closer, his eyes fell on the girl. For a moment he froze. His expression changed from curiosity to disbelief. His body stiffened and his breath caught in his throat. The girl looked up at him, confused by his reaction. There was silence, the kind that makes time stand still. The man's hands trembled slightly as he stared at her face. Her eyes, her small nose, her smile that seemed faint but familiar. His mind raced back to the past, to a time when his world had been full of laughter and family. Years ago, he had lost everything dear to him in one tragic night. His wife had left with their little daughter, and despite all his power and money, he had never found them again. Now, standing in front of him was a poor girl who looked exactly like the child he used to carry in his arms. He blinked, unable to speak. What did you say your name was?" he finally asked, his voice unsteady. The girl hesitated, not understanding why he asked. I don't really know my full name," she said shyly. "The people I stayed with called me Little Star. That's what my mother used to call me before she—" Her voice trailed off as she looked away. Something broke inside the man's heart. He took a step closer, his eyes filling with tears he hadn't shed in years. "Did you say your mother called you that?" he whispered. The girl nodded. "She said I was the only light in her dark world," she added softly. The man's world spun. The words struck deep. They were the same words his wife had once said before leaving. He felt his knees weaken as memories flooded back. His daughter's laughter, the way she would hold his finger, the small, star-shaped birthmark on her wrist. Trembling, he looked down at the girl's hand, and when he saw that familiar mark, his heart stopped. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. The poor, hungry girl standing in front of him wasn't just a stranger. She was his own daughter, the child he had lost so long ago. Tears rolled down his face as he struggled to speak. The girl watched him with confusion, wondering why this rich man was crying. He wanted to say something, to tell her the truth, but the words wouldn't come out. All he could whisper was, "Please, come inside." The girl hesitated. She didn't understand why this man who looked so powerful suddenly seemed so broken. But the warmth in his eyes made her feel safe for the first time in years. Slowly, she stepped into the mansion, unaware that her life and his was about to change forever. And as the door closed behind them, the world outside remained silent, not knowing that fate had just reunited a father with the daughter he thought he'd lost forever. Inside the grand mansion, the air felt warmer, softer, and filled with a quiet tension. The girl stood near the entrance, afraid to step any further. Her bare feet pressed against the marble floor, and she stared at the golden chandeliers above her. It was like stepping into a dream, or perhaps a world she was never meant to belong to. Everything around her sparkled, from the polished staircase to the paintings that covered the walls. Yet she felt small, almost invisible, standing there in her torn dress with her hands trembling. The man, still shaken, walked toward her slowly. His steps echoed through the hall, but his mind was far away, caught between disbelief and hope. He couldn't take his eyes off her. Every gesture, every expression she made reminded him of his little girl, the one he had lost years ago. But could it really be her? Or was fate just playing a cruel trick? He motioned for the servant to bring her something to eat. The girl hesitated, unsure if she should sit or stay standing. When a tray of warm bread and soup was placed before her, she looked up uncertainly. "Is this really for me?" she asked softly. The man nodded, still unable to form full sentences. "Eat, my child," he said quietly. His voice cracked slightly at the word child. The girl smiled faintly, whispered a thank you, and began eating slowly, savoring every bite as though it was the first meal of her life. He watched her closely, not just with his eyes but with his heart. Every movement reminded him of the past. He remembered how his little daughter used to eat bread in the same careful way, tearing small pieces, always holding the spoon with both hands. The memories hit him like waves. Her laughter in the garden, her small shoes by the door, and the lullabies her mother used to hum every night. He turned away for a moment, trying to control the emotions rising inside him. He had spent years building wealth, expanding his empire, and earning respect from people who barely knew his pain, but none of it filled the emptiness left behind when his wife left, taking their little girl with her. He had searched, prayed, and even hired investigators, but no one ever found them. He had begun to believe they were gone forever. And now, this poor girl, this child who had knocked on his door, was stirring something deep inside him that he hadn't felt in years. Hope. When she finished eating, she looked up and smiled shyly. "Thank you, sir. I'll leave now," she said politely. Her words jolted him back to the moment. "No, please wait," he said quickly. "You don't have to go anywhere tonight. It's cold outside. You can stay here." The girl's eyes widened. "Stay here?" she asked, surprised. "But I have nowhere to sleep. I don't want to cause trouble." "You won't," he said gently. "You can stay as long as you need." The servant looked at the man in confusion. This was unlike him. The billionaire was known for his strict and distant nature, never showing emotion, never letting strangers inside his home. But tonight, something had changed. The servant quietly left, leaving them alone. The man sat across from the girl. "Tell me," he said carefully, "where are your parents?" The girl lowered her eyes. "I don't know," she said quietly. "My mother died when I was small. I don't even remember her face clearly. After she was gone, I stayed with different people. Some were kind, others weren't. I used to dream that one day I'd find my father, but..." She stopped, wiping her tears. "I guess some dreams don't come true." The man's throat tightened. He felt an ache in his chest and a mix of guilt and heartbreak. He wanted to tell her that her dream had come true, that her father was right there in front of her. But fear held him back. What if he was wrong? What if he mistook her for someone else? He took a deep breath and asked, "Do you remember anything about your father? His name, maybe?" The girl shook her head. "No, my mother never said his name. She only said he was a good man once, but life changed him. She told me to never hate him no matter what." Those words pierced through him like a blade. She told me to never hate him. That was something only one woman had ever said, his wife. He felt the air leave his lungs as memories crashed back again. He remembered the night she left, the argument, the tears, the promises he failed to keep. His eyes filled with tears, and he turned away, pretending to wipe his face. The girl didn't notice. She was staring at the fire, lost in her own world. After a long silence, he finally said, "Would you show me your hand?" The girl looked confused but extended her small hand toward him. He gently turned it over and saw the faint star-shaped birthmark on her wrist. His eyes widened. It was the same mark his daughter was born with, the same mark he used to kiss every night before she slept. His lips trembled, his heart raced, and his eyes blurred with tears. He whispered under his breath, "It's really you." The girl looked up. "What did you say?" she asked curiously. He shook his head slightly, forcing a weak smile. Nothing, my dear. You must be tired. Go rest for now. We'll talk in the morning. She nodded gratefully, unaware of the storm of emotions inside him. As she walked toward the guest room, the man stood frozen, staring after her. His eyes glistened as he whispered to himself, "After all these years, my little star has come home." But deep down, he knew the truth had only begun to unfold, and the next morning would change everything forever. The morning sun filtered through the wide windows, spreading a golden glow across the mansion's marble floor. The house was quiet except for the soft chirping of birds outside. The man hadn't slept the entire night. He had sat in his study, staring at an old photograph of his wife holding their baby girl. The same innocent smile, the same eyes he had seen last night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that poor little girl standing at his door, her small hands trembling, her face hungry and lost. And every time his heart broke all over again. He held the photo close, whispering softly, "If only you could see her now, our little girl." His voice cracked as tears filled his eyes. For years he had tried to bury the past under layers of work, business meetings, and empty luxury, but nothing had ever healed the ache of losing them. Now, as fate brought that pain back to life, it also brought him a chance, and maybe the last one, to make things right. Down the hall, the girl slowly woke up. The soft bed beneath her felt strange, almost unreal. She had never slept in such comfort before. For a moment, she thought she was dreaming. The smell of fresh breakfast drifted through the air, making her stomach flutter with warmth and nervousness. She quickly folded the blanket and looked around the room. It was big, beautiful, with curtains that shimmered in the light. She touched the bedsheet gently, as if afraid it would disappear. When she stepped out into the hall, she saw the servant waiting. "Good morning, miss," he said politely. "Sir is waiting for you in the dining room." "Sir?" she repeated, blinking in confusion. No one had ever spoken to her that way. She nodded shyly and followed him down the hallway. At the long dining table, the man sat with a cup of tea in his hand. When he saw her, a smile appeared on his tired face. "Good morning," he said gently. "Did you sleep well?" The girl nodded. "Yes, sir. Thank you for letting me stay here." She hesitated before sitting down, unsure if she was allowed to. He gestured kindly for her to sit. He watched her again as she began to eat slowly, her manners careful, her movements gentle. She was polite, humble, and carried herself with quiet grace, the kind that came not from being taught but from surviving hardship. Every second confirmed what his heart already knew. Finally, he spoke softly. "You remind me of someone I once knew." The girl looked up curiously. "Really?" she asked. "Yes," he said, forcing a small smile. "Someone very dear to me. She had eyes just like yours, full of kindness and pain at the same time." The girl lowered her gaze. "People used to say my mother's eyes looked like that too," she said quietly. "She used to tell me that pain teaches people how to love better." The man's throat tightened. "Your mother was a wise woman," he said. The girl nodded slowly. "She was," she whispered. "But she never talked much about her past. She said there were memories too painful to share. Sometimes I'd see her crying at night holding a small picture. She always told me not to lose hope, that someday life would bring light into the darkness." Her words hit him like a wave. He could almost see his wife in those moments, and the same tears, the same silence, the same hidden photo. He leaned forward slightly. "Do you still have that picture?" he asked carefully. The girl nodded. "Yes, it's a bit torn, but I always keep it with me." She reached into her small cloth bag and pulled out an old folded photograph. Her fingers trembled as she handed it to him. The moment he unfolded it, his heart stopped. It was the very picture he had been holding the night before, his wife smiling with their baby in her arms. The edges were worn, but the image was clear enough. Tears filled his eyes as he stared at it, then at the girl. She noticed his reaction and asked softly, "Do you know them?" He swallowed hard, trying to find his voice. "Yes," he whispered. "I knew them." "Very well," she looked puzzled. "Were they your friends?" He looked down, hiding his face for a moment. When he looked back up, his voice was filled with emotion. That's my wife and my daughter in this picture." The girl's eyes widened. "Your daughter?" she repeated, her voice trembling. He nodded, his hands shaking. "Yes, I lost them both many years ago. I searched everywhere, but they were gone." his eyes filled with tears again. And now, here you are holding this photo. She looked at him in shock, her lips trembling. But how could that be? This was my mother's picture. She never told me who the man in it was. He took a deep breath, tears rolling down his cheeks. It was me, he said softly. That man was me, and you. You're my daughter. The room fell silent. The only sound was the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. The girl stared at him, frozen. Her mind couldn't process what she'd just heard. She wanted to speak, but her voice was gone. He stood up slowly and walked toward her. I thought I'd never see you again, he whispered. I thought you were gone forever. But when you knocked on that door last night, I saw your mother's eyes, your smile, and that birthmark. I knew in my heart it was you. The girl's eyes filled with tears. Her hands trembled as she covered her mouth. You're my father? She whispered, her voice breaking. He nodded, his face wet with tears. Yes, my child, I am. And for the first time in years, the walls of the mansion echoed not with silence, but with the sound of a father and daughter's tears, tears of pain, love, and the beginning of healing. The room remained still for a long time after those words were spoken. The air itself seemed to stop moving, heavy with emotion. The girl sat frozen in her chair, her wide eyes staring at the man in front of her, the man who claimed to be her father. Her mind was spinning, her heart pounding so hard that it hurt. She wanted to believe him, but the thought felt impossible. How could the poor lost girl who begged for bread be the daughter of a billionaire? The man took a careful step closer, afraid that one wrong word might scare her away. I know this is hard to believe, he said softly, his voice trembling, but I'm telling you the truth. I lost you when you were very little. I searched for years, but I couldn't find you or your mother. I never stopped hoping, not even for a day. The girl's eyes filled with tears, but she quickly looked away. If that's true, she whispered, why didn't you find us? Why did my mother die poor and alone while you lived in this big house? The question hit him like a knife. His lips trembled as he tried to speak. I didn't know where she went, he said in a broken voice. We fought that night, over something foolish, something I thought mattered. She left with you, and I thought she would come back after a few days, but she never did. When I finally realized how wrong I was, it was too late. I searched every city, every place I could think of. I even hired people to look for you both. I never gave up. But I never found you. The girl's tears began to fall. She wanted to be angry, to blame him for all the years of hunger, pain, and loneliness she had endured. But as she looked into his eyes filled with regret and grief, she saw no lies. Only a man who had carried his guilt like a shadow for too long. Still, she shook her head. I don't know if I can believe this, she said softly. Everything feels like a dream. My whole life I wished for a father who would come back for me. But now that you're here, I don't know what to feel. He nodded slowly, understanding her confusion. You don't have to believe me right now, he said gently. I'll prove it to you. I'll show you everything. The photos, the letters, even your birth records. But please, just give me a chance. Let me be here for you now, even if I couldn't be before. Her lips quivered as she wiped her tears. I don't hate you, she whispered. I just don't know how to accept this. He felt a strange relief hearing those words. You don't have to, he said. Not today. We'll take it one step at a time. The man turned and opened a drawer from a nearby cabinet. He pulled out a small wooden box, its surface slightly worn but carefully kept. He opened it and took out an old golden bracelet. Tiny, delicate, with a small charm shaped like a star. You used to wear this when you were little, he said softly. Your mother made it for you on your first birthday. The girl gasped when she saw it. Her fingers reached out slowly, trembling. I remember this, she whispered. I lost it when I was very small. My mother cried that day, but I didn't understand why. He placed it gently in her hand. She made it with love, he said. She said you were her little star, the light of our life. Her tears returned, rolling down her cheeks as she clutched the bracelet to her chest. That's what she always called me, she said between sobs. Little star. The man's eyes filled again. That's what I called you too, he said softly. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of unspoken love, of the years they could never get back. The girl stood up slowly, unsure of what to do. Then, as if guided by something deep inside her heart, she walked toward him. He didn't move. He just stood there, his heart racing, afraid to breathe. Finally, she whispered, I don't know if I'm ready to call you father yet, but I believe you." He couldn't hold back his tears anymore. He stepped forward and pulled her into his arms. For a moment, neither spoke. The world outside faded away. It was just them, a father and daughter holding on to a second chance at life. After a while, she stepped back and looked up at him. "My mother, she always said you weren't a bad man," she said softly. "She said you made mistakes but had a good heart." "I think she was right." He smiled through his tears. "She was always right," he whispered. That evening, he took her through the house, showing her old photographs, her toys that he had kept all these years, and even the nursery that had remained untouched since the day she left. She walked around slowly, her eyes wide with wonder. Everything felt strange but familiar, as if she had returned to a place her heart remembered but her mind had forgotten. As the night grew darker, she sat by the window of her new room, holding the bracelet in her hand. For the first time in many years, she didn't feel alone. Yet deep inside, a quiet sadness still lingered, the ache of losing her mother, the confusion of rediscovering her father, and the fear of whether this happiness would last. Downstairs, the man looked out into the night sky, whispering softly, "Thank you for bringing her back to me." But he also knew this reunion came with its own challenges. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Trust had to be rebuilt, pain had to be healed, and wounds had to be forgiven. Still, in that moment, both father and daughter shared the same silent hope, that maybe, just maybe, love had given them another chance. The next morning felt different, lighter somehow. The mansion, once quiet and cold, now carried a warmth that had been missing for years. The staff noticed it too. For the first time in a long while, their employer, the man who once walked around with silence in his eyes, was smiling again. And the reason sat right across from him at the breakfast table, the young girl who had knocked on his door 2 nights ago. She sat quietly, her eyes lowered as she sipped her tea. It still felt strange sitting in such a grand dining room with plates of food she never dreamed of having. Sometimes she would pause, wondering if this was all real or if she'd wake up in the cold streets again. But every time she looked up and saw the man her father had watching her with gentle eyes, she began to believe it more. "Did you sleep well?" he asked softly. She nodded. "Yes," she said. "I still wake up sometimes thinking I have to find food, but then I remember where I am." She smiled shyly. His heart broke a little hearing that. No child should ever have to worry about food. He wanted to tell her she'd never be hungry again, but he also knew words weren't enough. He had to earn her trust through actions. After breakfast, he asked her to walk with him in the garden. The air was fresh and the flowers swayed gently in the morning breeze. She walked beside him, still quiet, still unsure how to act around him. "You know," he began, "when I built this garden, it was meant for you. I imagined you running through it, chasing butterflies, laughing. I never thought it would stand empty for so long." She looked around, the flowers reflected in her wide eyes. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "I wish I could remember this place." "You were too little," he said. "You were barely 3 when you left." She hesitated for a moment, then asked, "What happened between you and my mother?" He sighed deeply, the question he feared the most. "We loved each other," he said, "but I made mistakes. I was too busy chasing success. I wanted to give her everything, a better life, a future, but I forgot that she didn't want wealth. She wanted time, love, peace. I didn't see it until she left. By the time I realized, it was already too late." The girl listened quietly, her expression softening. "She used to say something like that," she said. "That love without time slowly fades. But she also said she hoped one day you'd learn what truly mattered." He smiled sadly. "She was right again," he said. "I did learn, the hard way." They sat down on a bench near the fountain. For a while they said nothing. The sound of water filled the silence. Then she looked up and asked, "Did you ever stop loving her?" His eyes glistened as he shook his head. "Never," he said. "I loved her until her last day, and I'll love her until mine. She was my heart, and you're a piece of her I got back." Those words reached somewhere deep inside her. For the first time, she reached out and held his hand. It was a small gesture, but it meant everything. He looked down at their joined hands and smiled through tears. As the days passed, their bond began to grow stronger. The mansion that once echoed with silence now filled with laughter. He would show her old photos, tell her stories of when she was a baby, how she used to fall asleep on his chest, how she'd cry if he left the room. Sometimes she'd listen quietly, other times she'd laugh. Slowly, the distance between them began to fade. Yet deep inside her, she carried guilt. One evening, as they sat near the fire, she turned to him and said softly, "Sometimes I feel like I don't belong here. Like this isn't my world. I grew up in places where no one cared, where I had to fight to survive. And now all of a sudden I'm here, in a house full of everything I used to dream of. It feels wrong." He shook his head gently. "No, my dear. This is where you belong. Not because of the wealth, but because this is your home. You don't need to change who you are. Your strength, your kindness, they are what make you my daughter." Tears welled up in her eyes. "But what about all the years we lost?" she asked. "We can never get them back." He nodded slowly. "You're right. We can't bring the past back, but we can make the future better, together." Those words stayed with her. She began to feel lighter, freer. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel alone. She started reading books, exploring the garden, even helping the kitchen staff. The house began to feel like a home again. She opened it carefully and found a letter inside. The handwriting was delicate, her mother's. The letter was addressed to her father. Her hands shook as she read it. "If you ever find this letter, know that I never left because I stopped loving you. I left because I wanted our daughter to grow up with love, not anger. I prayed every day that you would one day see her again. She is your heart, your light. When that day comes, hold her close and never let her feel alone again. She will need your strength and you will need her forgiveness." Tears blurred her vision as she folded the letter back. She walked downstairs, her heart pounding. Her father looked up when she entered the room, concern in his eyes. "What's wrong?" he asked. She handed him the letter silently. His hands trembled as he opened it and began to read. As he finished, tears streamed down his face. He looked at her, his voice barely a whisper. "Your mother. She knew this day would come." She nodded, crying softly. "She did. And she wanted you to forgive yourself." He took a deep breath and wiped his tears. "Then let's do that," he said. "Let's forgive each other. For the time lost, for the pain endured. Let's start again." She stepped closer and wrapped her arms around him. This time she didn't hesitate. She rested her head against his chest and he held her as if he would never let go again. The years of emptiness, loneliness, and regret melted away in that single embrace. From that day on, they began a new life together, not as a rich man and a poor girl, but as a father and daughter healing from the wounds of the past. He made sure she received an education, followed her dreams, and lived the childhood she never had. The mansion, once filled with silence, now echoed with laughter, music, and love. He would often find her in the garden, sitting by the fountain where they first talked, reading books or feeding the birds. And every time he saw her, he silently thanked life for giving him a second chance. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky in shades of orange and gold, she sat beside him on the same bench. "Do you ever think Mom can see us?" she asked softly. He smiled gently. "I don't just think she can," he said. "I know she can. She's the reason we found each other again." The girl leaned her head on his shoulder, watching the sunset. "Then I think she's smiling right now," she whispered. He nodded, his eyes glistening. "So do I." A story that began with a poor girl knocking on a stranger's door had ended with a father finding his lost child, and a family being rebuilt by fate, forgiveness, and the quiet power of love.